So welcome everyone to the Food Waste Research Trends panel. My name's Katy Franklin. I'm Operations Manager at ReFed. And so my work actually focuses primarily on business development at ReFed. And then I have the great joy of also being able to do some research in my spare time. And I also get to work on research through the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research. And so I have a fantastic group of panelists up here. Sorry, guys. This is Roni Neff, Assistant Professor and Program Director of Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, Center for a Livable Future. Thank you for making that short and easy for me. Lucyna Kurtyka, Senior Scientific Program Director at the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, also called FAR. You'll hear us say FAR a lot. Danyi, who's a PhD candidate at Ohio State University and soon to be based at Louisiana State University. And then we also have Gary McMurray, Principal Research Engineer at Georgia Tech. So a really fantastic group of folks here. Well, let's welcome them. Thank you for indulging me. So today we're just going to talk about some of the emerging research trends, hear about some of the fantastic work that my colleagues here are doing on the topic, and then actually dive into some of the challenges that we're facing in this field in terms of, executing research, sharing research, and just having really fantastic information and data out there. And throughout this panel, we really do invite y'all's participation, so feel free to raise your hand. We should have some mic runners. Oh, here, thank you, ladies. So we have some mic runners who will come around, so just stand up, put your hand up, feel free to interject at any point, and we'll be happy to chat with you guys. So just kind of starting from the top, if we could go down the row and tell me about, one or two research initiatives that you're working on right now or something that you've recently completed that we might not already know about.
Good. Should I start?
Yeah.
Hi. So, as was mentioned, I'm from the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, and we are an academic center that focuses on food systems and public health. And within that, I run a program on wasted food, and so we have probably about 10 different research projects going on at the moment related to this topic. And my two big new ones, both about 4-year projects. One is looking at the U.S. seafood supply. So our earlier research found that about 47% of the U.S. seafood supply is maybe wasted. And so we are tracing that seafood supply back from where it starts, whatever country it starts in, and looking at waste all along the supply chain and looking at potential interventions and their feasibility and acceptability, and including a lot of work with consumers. One of the reasons that seafood may be wasted in particularly high percentages is because it's so perishable and it smells so early. So we're really digging into that issue with consumers. That's one. And then the other one with Beth Feingold over there, funded by FAR, we are looking at the food donation and recovery system as a system in the Albany, New York area, and looking at doing a modeling project, looking at the network of players that are involved and the potential health and economic and environmental effects of the food that is recovered and is not recovered, and of potential interventions.
Wonderful, Lucyna.
Just to give you a quick background about FAR, because I'm not sure that everyone knows who we are. So the Foundation for Food and Ag Research was established by Congress in the 2014 Farm Bill through bipartisan support. And Congress gave us $200 million to support innovative research in food and agriculture. It also gave us the challenge to raise matching funds at least 1-to-1. So in other words, we cannot release any research funding unless we have partners who are able to help us co-fund any kind of a project. We are an independent organization. So we are a nonprofit organization, but our mission is also to complement the USDA mission. So we are closely working with USDA to ensure that there is no duplication of efforts. And USDA has ex-officio representatives on our board of directors. So going back to food waste. Food waste is one of the 7 focus areas that we have. Roni already mentioned one project, but I'm going to mention 2 other projects that we are currently funding in that space. And that is one research project conducted by UC Davis, and we have Ned present here from that team. This is a project that is testing beads that remove moisture from products. This is maybe not maybe very complex sounding idea. Nevertheless, what is important about this project is the fact that it eliminates the need for any kind of a heat to remove water from products. And the second part is that those beads are reusable. So in fact, they can be used not only just in the US, but in fact, especially useful will be in developing countries. So that's one project. Another project we are co-funding with the Walmart Foundation. The project is being actually led by the World Wildlife Fund. Again, in collaboration with UC Davis, North Carolina State University, as well as Extension and farmers. And the purpose of this particular research is to maximize the opportunity for farmers. In other words, minimizing the amount of fruits or vegetables that are otherwise left in the field and plowed over and used mostly as fertilizer. So the idea is to develop a mechanism that would connect farmers and mostly rural communities to not only provide value for the farmers for harvesting food, but also provide value to those communities who otherwise wouldn't have access to nutritious food.
My name is Danyi. I'm a PhD student from the Ohio State University. My research mainly focused on the consumer food waste behaviors. So basically to analyze why consumer wastes so much food, given the great cost of wasting food, and how do they respond to the food waste policies, how food waste policies could potentially interact with each other, and based on those interactions, how can we design efficient food waste policies to maximize social welfare to achieve our reduction goals? But for all those analyses, we need data to base on. So currently, Ohio State are collaborating with Lucyna State University to develop a smartphone app called as Food Image to accurately collect consumers' food purchasing, food preparation, food intake, and food waste data inside their home in free living conditions. So basically, this app, we ask the participant to take a picture of their grocery receipts, and the app can automatically capture all the information on the receipts, and the participant needs to take pictures during their food processing stage, take a picture before and after their meal so that we can collect data about what types of food they eat, how much they eat, and how much they throw away. They need to note where those uneaten food goes. Did they throw it away into the garbage bin directly, or they compost them, or they use the food to feed their dogs or cats? So this app is currently under beta test, and I would expect with this data, we can have more understanding about the consumers' food purchasing, food preparation, food intake, and food waste behaviors. This is one project we are really excited about. And another project is conducted in the Ohio State in a dining experiment. We want to see how different food waste policies will change consumers' food waste behaviors and another related behaviors. We randomly assigned participants into different groups, and we found the messages about the social and environmental cost of food waste indeed could help the consumers to reduce food waste. But for those aware participants, when we also told them that food waste would be composted, they actually waste more food. The potential mechanism is that they feel less guilty about it. They perceive it's less costly to waste the food when someone could help them compost those food waste. So this experiment shows that the different food waste policy indeed can interact with each other, and we need to find a way, the most efficient way to achieve our goals. And from this study, we also found the diners adjust their the amount of food waste they generated by adjusting their food selection behaviors and the food intake behaviors. So some of them will reduce food waste by selecting less food at the beginning, which can provide more food to the people who really need those food and save the resource has been used to produce those food. But some consumers, they reduce food waste by overeating the over-ordered food. In that case, there is no food saved from the hungry people. There is no resource saved from their behaviors. And they may induce like health costs associated with overweight or obesity. So our study shows that it's not only important to achieve the food waste reduction, but also we should achieve food waste reduction in a healthy way, in a sustainable way. And I hope with the data coming out from our app, we can have a better understanding about how the consumers achieve the food waste reduction at their home. How can we help them to promote the sustainability inside their household? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for all attending. I guess this is one of the last sessions, so I'm very impressed with the attendance here. My name is Gary McMurray. I'm with Georgia Tech. I'm kind of the odd man out here, I feel sometimes. My background is not at all in agriculture or food. My background is in robotics and controls. I actually am an associate director for the Robotics Institute at Georgia Tech, where we have about 82 faculty members that work in robotics. But I've kind of gotten into the agricultural area in the last few years because it's a very challenging area in a lot of different ways, and the problems are significant, as you know, many of those that we've been talking about at this event. In the past couple of years, we've been doing some work in this area. One area that we've been doing a lot of work on is in the area of pre-symptomatic disease detection in fields. The idea being that if you could actually identify diseases in individual plants, that you could actually do something at a plant level as opposed to a field level intervention. There's tremendous amount of value there. Not only do we lose, I think it's 16% of our crops to diseases and 12% of our crop to pest. So it's a lot of waste right there. It's usually not counted as food loss or food waste, but it actually is. It's a big impact to the growers. But just trying to bring that type of technology to bear to this type of a problem. And we also have been working in the area of helping and processing facilities, particularly in the protein side, to improve their efficiency in their deboning operations and meat yields, such that they can capture all that meat and sell it to the consumer at a fair value. And in the process of doing this, we've actually started creating a lot of what we call system of systems models, where we're looking at a processing plant and trying to understand the interactions between water use, food safety, labor, and these kinds of issues, because those things are very well correlated, and it has a lot of unintended consequences. In Georgia, we had a severe drought about 10 years ago, and they asked all the poultry processing companies to half their water consumption, which they all did. The unintended consequence was food safety. Salmonella counts spiked and things like this. So it's a very complicated scenario of these interactions. So we're very interested in these types of systems dynamics. We feel that in this community, there's a lot of opportunity in that area.
Great, thank you everyone. And so as you may have noticed, we have a wide variety of fantastic research experts up here on the board. And also, I think this is pretty representative, not in terms of, you know, we have everyone represented here, but of the research sector overall in food waste, and that there's so many different ways that you can come at it and so many different pieces of it to research from the systems level, the socioeconomic perspective, from the robotics and different interventions perspectives. And then also that we have a lot of funders and also industry groups getting involved in food waste research, whether that's internal research and kind of the R&D perspective, or funding research projects like many of the partners that co-fund with Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research. So I'd love to kind of hear from everybody, what aspect of your work has been most impactful? And, whether that's kind of from an individual perspective of, being able to do the work. Danyi, I think we heard a little bit of your passion down there. Or from actually seeing the impact on the system. Just, tell me a little bit about, what are some of the impacts that you're able to produce?
First.
Oh, okay. This is why I said at the end, so I wouldn't start. So much for that theory. One of the things which has been very exciting for me is that robotics and sensors is not something, it's starting to gain traction in agricultural world, but it's not something which is really, still at the forefront. In the research world, they're starting to gain a lot more funding and a lot more activity in this area. But it's been very exciting for me just to see when I talk to groups like this and I talk to growers and we can talk about, well, here's the real world things that we saw. We were able to identify a plant that was sick, a week before there were any physical symptoms. Okay, and to see the grower's eyes kind of light up and say, well, what's that going to mean to my yields? We say, well, we might be able to increase yield by 5 to 10%. And they're like, you can see their head calculating the numbers, and that means a lot. And when they also realize, well, you don't have to spray your entire field. You can spot spray, and we're developing robotic systems to do that kind of stuff. And then as we begin to have these conversations, when I bring it back to my university and to my colleagues and I start talking to them about the work that we're doing, well, now I have guys in materials engineering who get very excited. Now all the AI guys, artificial intelligence, that's a buzzword, and, I could get on a long soapbox on why I hate AI. But, it is a very, very powerful tool when used properly. But they get very excited about how they can help. And so now we have a school, Georgia Tech, we're not a land-grant institute, but now we're getting all these faculty members who are very excited about this area because they see the problem and they can see ways that they can tangibly impact and help solve those problems in collaboration with our partners at the land-grant universities, the growers, the commodity groups, and foundations. And that gets to be exciting for me when I see other people get excited and I can see that we can have an impact.
As I mentioned before, I would expect the data coming out from the app will provide the first ever comprehensive view about the consumer's food-related behavior at their home in free living conditions. I think this is important because the efforts or the food waste reduction achievement in the early stage of the supply chain will have limited impact if consumers refuse to change their behaviors or if consumers refuse to do their parts. All the food saved in the early stage supply chain could be potentially re-wasted by the consumers. So it's important to understand their behavior, but to understand their behavior, we need to have data. We need to understand how do they make their purchasing decisions, how do they prepare their food, how do they choose what types of food to eat, what types of food to throw away. Those will generate a different social environment and economic cost. So I think the data coming out from this app could help us review those informations and help us have a better understanding about how to guide the consumers to improve the sustainability inside their home. So I think this is very exciting.
So as a new organization that just started issuing research grants about a year and a half ago, obviously we still have to wait for the final results of the research that we are funding. Nevertheless, as I mentioned, we fund innovative research, and we know that this research will make a difference and move the needle in the food waste area. So benefiting not only farmers and rural communities in the case of the WWF study, but also helping preserve food, and not only in the US but also in developing countries that have limited access to technologies that could help them to actually avoid losses or at least minimize those losses. So we are talking about the UC Davis project. But I also want to mention that in addition to those two projects, we also issue something called New Innovator Award. And what is critical about this award is that it is intended for young researchers who have been working at the research institutions, so that not only just academia, but all other research institutions for no more than 3 years. And they are, anyone can submit, who is recommended by their institution, can submit an application for the award. And of course, the most promising proposal is funded at the level of $600,000 over 3 years. And the idea, so that covers also the food waste area. And the idea is to not only provide seed money, and this is a nice seed money for a young researcher, and maintain that researcher in the food and ag area, but also to help build a research program that this person simply is interested in building and developing. So this actually has been already very impressive, because we are in the process of actually issuing the third set of New Innovator Awards. This is a yearly award. And you can obviously look at the awards that we granted on our website. But what I'm saying is, it is just simply impressive to see the number of fantastic ideas that young researchers have and submit to us.
That's great. And just quickly before you dive in, Roni, I want to kind of echo that. And even in just having Danyi here and the work that you're doing in university right now on food waste, we've seen just an incredible increase in the number of students studying food waste. I'm not sure actually what your program's called, Danyi, but whether it's from kind of like the economics perspective or food insecurities perspective, but there are real programs out there at dozens of universities that are focusing on this issue, which is a huge sign of success and progress. So sorry, go ahead.
Well, then before I start, I need to say also at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, we have a concentration and a certificate in food systems and public health, where people are focusing on the issue of wasted food, and we have funding for master's and doctoral students. So come talk to me if you're interested. In terms of impact, so it's always hard to say, you're doing your research, you put it out there in the world, where, exactly what is the impact, and if somebody comes and talks to you about it because they were interested, is that the impact? So I struggled with how to answer this question, so I said, well, maybe it's just, because it got a lot of media buzz. And so we put out a study about a year ago looking at the nutritional content of food that's wasted, and we quantified all the different, vitamins and calories and fat and all these kinds of things in the food. And we got our own BuzzFeed video. So that's like, that means that we made it, right? But I think, and so why do you do a study like that, right? Because we kind of know that there's a lot of nutrients that are wasted. We know we're wasting a lot of produce, and so therefore there's going to be a lot of nutrients that are wasted. But one of the reasons to do that work is because it is very media friendly, and therefore it helps raise awareness, and it gets people talking, and it gets people thinking in a way that maybe they hadn't been thinking before. So that's one example. I was really proud of that one.
That's wonderful. I don't have a BuzzFeed video, so congrats. And Lucyna, from the far perspective, you have an incredibly powerful model. You're effectively kind of catalyzing investment into this space from the philanthropic point. What are some proof points from FAR? You mentioned 2 of these research projects that are ongoing, but what are some additional proof points from that are unique to FAR that other foundations aren't doing?
Well, so as an independent foundation, first of all, we can, and we actually are mandated to partner with the private sector to raise matching funds. Our main co-founders are foundations and the private sector, as I mentioned. Again, by legislation, match has to come from non-federal sources, because we already received taxpayers' money, $200 million. And Congress developed this model to double public money for research. And so far, we've been able to raise more than actually $1 dollar for research investment. Just to give you an example, so far, we funded 84 projects, committed $89 million. But for that, we actually raised $105 million. So this is definitely more than one-to-one match. And we have over 100 partners who are working with us. So the idea is that we bring to the table people representing different sectors, different points of view, which is really critical to the success of the foundation. And we provide a forum where people, even competitors, can talk to each other and agree on the type of projects that need to be funded.
So in case you didn't catch that, that was $194 million to funding research in the food and ag space. That's great work. And Gary, your work isn't focused specifically on food waste, as you've mentioned. What are some of the benefits and drawbacks to us talking about food waste and defining it that way? How are we limiting ourselves or enabling ourselves there?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things I really enjoyed about this conference is just learning about the culture and the group that is already formed around this area. And it's very clear to me that you have a lot of thought and a lot of processes and a lot of investment in your current processes. But one of the things that I always like to think about is, so I actually wrote down a quote here. So I always have to have a quote for something. So this is from economics. It's actually from a guy I really like, Friedrich Hayek. And he says, "The curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design." and when you think about the food system, we've got this system which has emerged. It's kind of it wasn't something that we planned. But when we talk about food waste and things like this, we do tend to talk about it as if it's a system, and if we just pull the lever, push the button, if we could just get people to do this, and this is when the reality hits, because I've got 2 teenage boys, and I've got a 14-year-old boy who knows everything, and it doesn't matter what I tell him, he knows it better than I do. So I bite my tongue a lot and move on. But it's really hard for us to be able to just crank out a system and say, hey, if we just did this, it would work perfectly. What we need to understand is it's not going to work perfectly. Okay, so the question is, from my point of view, is, well, what's the technology? What are the things that we could put into place that would help improve the system? What I see a lot, and I'm not picking on people, so please don't take this the wrong way. But when you have people in the system, they do random things. And in processing plants, I see this all the time, is they'll have a piece of equipment and it's working perfectly fine, but they change shifts. And the next guy comes in, the first thing he does is turn all the knobs. And you're like, what are you doing? He goes, well, these are my settings. But the machine's working great. Yeah, but it's my settings. Okay? How do you get over that? And one of the things you can do is by adding technology and adding things in to be able to help take out some of that. And so when I look at the food system, I tend to think 5 to 10 years out. My job is, I always try to make clear to people, is I'm not here to compete against you. Okay, you guys are doing a fantastic job of solving the current problems and making great strides forward. And me as an academic, if I'm competing against you, you guys are going to blow me away every time. Okay, you're much faster. So I'm trying to think 5 to 10 years out. So I'm thinking about, well, what's that system? Okay, when I look at autonomous transportation, okay, when I look at artificial intelligence, when I look at robotics, how is that going to impact the food production and the food system that we have? Okay, given the fact that we can't control everything, okay, and we shouldn't imagine that, but what's that going to do? And I think it's going to have a huge impact in everything that we do. Robotics, from some of the things I was talking about earlier in the work that we've done with the on-farm production, but just through the supply chain, the sensors that we're going to have, the ability for restaurants to be able to much better or accurately project and plan out how much food they're going to need on any particular day so they can minimize their loss. Robotic systems that are going to do the cooking, that we do food prep, where we can begin to customize the food for individual people. Okay, we've seen in the last few years just an explosion of customizable products. All of us know people who are allergic to dairy, wheat, low salt diets. You name your type of diet. But how do we customize food for those individual people? Okay, and the amounts. Okay, so right now we have standard production amounts. Whether you go to the grocery store, products are produced at a certain amount. Okay, you go to the restaurant, you get servings at a certain amount. And that leads to a lot of the food waste, okay, because it's not customizable. But as we begin to automate, we begin to bring technology and begin to have customizable food, I see the ability really to be able to change that model, where we could have something where you could order something and 2 hours later have it delivered to your house, cooked exactly how you want it at the exact amount, so that it's the right number of calories, it's customized to you as far as salt, or whatever content that you want. And that's going to dramatically change the way things work. No longer will you be buying food a week ahead of time and planning out your meals. You'll be planning out 2 hours ahead of time. Okay, much more manageable system. So I think that I'm very curious about how technology is going to change that whole system. And that's just one of the things I've enjoyed, meeting and talking to people here to get their inputs about, how these things are going to change. And I've also just gotten a lot of input on other, things that people have seen that's also going to change the system. And I think it's a very exciting time to be in this area, because I think it's ripe as far as the investment goes from a lot of the corporations, as well as FAR and other organizations, as well as people recognizing the value of this type of research. So very excited.
And Roni, we've heard Lucyna and Gary both now talk about partnerships, and whether it's other foundations participating, corporates. You didn't say it explicitly, Gary, but I hear you alluding to the tech industry there too. What are the benefits and challenges to partnering, and how do we manage the risks there, and whether those are perceived or real?
So the benefits are in some ways easy. Like, we know we need to, as we develop our research questions, as we think about how we're going to implement them, as we figure out the implications of our results, and as we try and get our results uptaken, we should not be working in isolation as researchers. We should be working with potential users of that information. And I think it's really important to say that that is both those in the business sector, and it's also the workers. It's also, for example, within food pantries, it may be, or food banks, it may be the leadership, but it may also be the clients. It may be the volunteers. So it's I think when we think about who are our partners, we need to think broadly. Just give one quick example. We're doing some research with supermarkets, and we want to understand the determinants of why food may get discarded, and we're interviewing the stockers, who are themselves the ones that are doing that discarding, to hear their perspectives, because it's one thing to hear what's the official policy, but it's another to hear from those who are most engaged. So I think that it's really important to have all these partnerships. There's also a risk as researchers, like, our currency is our credibility. And academic integrity is really important, because if we're going to publish something, it has to be something that is trusted by those who look at it. And so there's this balance between, if you're partnering with industry, or if you're seen as having funding from a particular industry, how is that going to affect the credibility of the product? So there's a real need to balance that and to create systems that enable the separation, and and I could talk about some of the things that also could contribute to credibility, such as was discussed in the last session, filing your protocol in advance. So you are fully stating, this is what I'm going to do and this is how I'm going to do it. And then it becomes clear that you were the one who said it in the last session, but I think that's really important. And having sort of, like, this industry did not fund this project that then benefits that industry, having more pooled funding, things like that. So there's a lot that can be done to promote that credibility.
That's great. Thank you. Any other comments on that one there about kind of the value of partnerships and
So, yeah, I mean, I think collaboration is absolutely critical in everything that we do. As I said, I'm an engineer, and I know engineering, but my favorite, one of my favorite lines is you put a dollar sign in front of the numbers and I get confused. So teaming up with people who understand business, because we need the economic models, and I know absolutely nothing about public policy or public health. So how do those issues play into this? And when I build teams, I always say it's the right person for the right job, because I'd much rather reach out to the experts and get them involved and let them bring their expertise to this, because that makes the project better, as opposed to trying to force fit someone else and say, well, you can learn this topic. That never works. So we really need that partnership. So I talked a lot about the academic side, but we also really need that partnership with industry. So almost all my projects, there's growers involved. We always are doing something in the field. So, and this is something I've just learned over the years. I can do stuff in the lab and I can write papers on simulations all day long. But when you put something in the field, that's when the rubber meets the road, and that's when you really learn if what you're doing worked or not. So you have to be able to do that. But the only way you can do that is if you have those partners, and then also working with a company that would be that service provider, such that you have a way of transitioning that technology. So you have a plan for doing that. Again, if the final result of a project is a bunch of academic papers, that's great for my PhD students, but it's not great for the technology transfer. Okay, so you have to be able to build that into it. So you need those partnerships up front. So I'm a very big believer in, if you're going to do something like this, get the right people, make it a big team, and so that you have everybody that's involved, and that you think through the technology transfer of how you're going to get something into the field, or out the door when the project is over.
And go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention. We, as a foundation, we must form partnerships, and they are obviously important for matching funds purposes. But what is important is the fact that I mentioned before, that those partners bring different perspectives, and they help also identify the needs for specific innovations in specific fields. Therefore, we partner with the private sector, but to address the issue that Roni mentioned about the scientific credibility, all proposals that are submitted to us go through independent peer review. So that's one level of separation from the influence, undue influence, so to speak. But the second part is that we do require that each research results be published in peer-reviewed journals. So that's another level of evaluation, separate evaluation from research from the industry. At the end, what is critical is that research results be applied in practice, be adopted in the field, and I think that also, in a way, gives credibility to the research that you have something tangible that comes with the work that was performed.
That's great. And Danyi, talking about the app and the data collection that you're going to be doing, I mean, how do you plan to share that, and who do you think is going to be benefiting from that the most? Will it specifically be consumers able to go back in and review their data, and kind of who will be the users of that, and what type of partnerships do you see forming?
So for this app currently is mainly for academic use, and in the long run, we may want to expand this app and ask the consumers to use that word. So currently, based on the data we collected, we found as our participants using this app, they started to realize how much food they are throwing away every day. And without any data feedbacks from this app, just by taking a picture before they threw it away, they started to learn to reduce food waste by themselves. And the differences here are very significant. So I think in the long run, it will be very beneficial to make this app to be public and be available to general consumers. And I know there are apps available in United Kingdoms, and they test the app in the countries with 50 households, I believe, and they found after 1 year use of the measurement app, they reduce food waste by a large amount, I think, I remember. So I really think this app, if this app can be publicized, it will be really helpful. And as you mentioned before about the partnership, I think we also benefit a lot from that, because at the beginning, I can still remember in the early year of my PhD, I was always wondering, where is my data? Where can I get the data? How can I graduate without data? But suddenly one day I read the news from NPR, and I realized nutrition has been working on this field for years. They have been struggling to collecting the food intake data for years. To measure food intake, they have to have the amount of food the consumer ordered and the amount of food they threw away. So they have those data. So by collaborating with the nutritionists who are working in this field for years, we have new access to data, so we know how to collect the food waste data in an easier and also accurate way. So I think the partnerships is very important.
That's great. And, food waste itself in terms of the practice is a fairly young field. And rather than, reinventing the wheel several times, I heard you mention nutritionists. Gary, you're an outsider anyways, so you're in this circle. Roni, I heard you mention, laborers, food banks. Who else should we be involving in this conversation about data collection and research and advancing this? And anyone take that one.
Who else should be involved?
Who else should be involved in this conversation about to collect data, to gather information from, and to advance solutions?
I think I mentioned some groups that I think should be involved, but another group is other researchers. And I will tell you that twice in the past 6 months, I have had a project that I was getting underway and then found out that someone else was doing the same project. And not just like kind of the same project, but like the same project. And it's partly because this is such a rapidly developing field, and at the moment there's so much low-hanging fruit, and we're all like, we gotta address this low-hanging fruit, so everybody's kind of gravitating in some of the similar places. So we have to find ways to be able to share who's about to do what and who's doing what, so that we don't end up in that problem.
And that's a fantastic point, because you start a research project, it can take 2, 3, 4, 5 years before you finish it, and then there's the peer review process, which also take time. So that's fantastic, and I would hope that some of the work that FAR is doing is helping to coordinate some of that activity and elevate some of the conversations that folks are having. And you'll hear a report out from our research working group, but also seeing what else we can do about that.
Yeah, and we also would like to see the involvement researchers from the fields considered non-traditional ag sciences, so obviously computational sciences, but also sciences that are socioeconomists. That's an important group of scientists that shouldn't be marginalized when talking about food waste, because of the socioeconomic implications of food waste and impact on communities. So that's one thing. And the second thing, if it comes to actually research on specific technologies, we should also look outside of the food system at technologies that are being developed and applied outside of that system that perhaps could be adapted in the food system. So sort of thinking outside the box.
Anything else from y'all? It's okay if you don't.
Well, I'll just add one more group, which is the sociologists and critical theorists. We often think about a lot of the work we need to do as very practical, but we really also need to have a critical perspective and to sort of question both unintended consequences, who's being affected, how, and so often, this was also discussed in the prior session. I don't see the person in the room that raised it, but it's really important that we be questioning ourselves at the same time as we are going forward, and trying to look at what else is what are we missing?
Do you have an example of how encountering that yourself, or?
I mean, I think with this issue, I mean, Danny raised a really great example of this issue of composting. And in our research, we also found that 41% of the people that said that they composted said that it didn't bother them to throw away food because they were just going to compost it, so that's a good thing. So, so digging deeper into some of these types of conundrums, we really need that. We need qualitative data. We need to understand those dynamics better to get at win-win solutions.
So I do want to open it up to some questions for the audience. And y'all can get up and stand and jump around if you need to get some energy in you. We've got one back there. If we could run a mic back.
I have a question for Danny. Danny, is your app going to include the dollar savings that people are able to recognize when they avoid the food waste, when they're capturing their food waste quantity as a way of reinforcing their behavior? And I have a question for Roni. Is anyone doing research on the health outcomes of people receiving food from food rescue organizations as a social benefit to reducing food waste?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah. So currently the app cannot convert the grams of the food waste into the dollar sign, but I think in the long run it will be easy to do that. We plan to convert the grams of the food that is thrown away into calories, into dollar sign, into greenhouse gas, to provide more information about how much resources we are wasting right now. And if we want to use this app as a tool to help the consumers to reduce food waste at home, I think those information will be very important, because currently we found even without data feedbacks, consumer can learn to reduce food waste. We would expect with more data feedback to them, like how much money you are throwing away today, and how much greenhouse gas you are emitting by throwing away this banana. And with those information, they may have even more incentive to change their behaviors and to help reduce food waste. Yes.
And in terms of the research about the health impacts, so the study that I mentioned that's being led by Beth Feingold, we are actually looking at that. So we're taking the data on, for example, quantity of produce, and then we're running it through that nutritional calculator that I had mentioned that we have, which is also publicly available if any of you want that, to look at the nutritional content of the food. And then we're doing epidemiological data to look at how could eating this amount of food affect health outcomes like diabetes and type 2 diabetes and things like that. I will say it's really tricky to do this, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because you get a certain amount of food that you picked up in that pantry. You're eating a whole lot of other things. And so how are we going to tease out what is the impact of that food versus everything else in the diet, and potential rebound effects, like I ate my apple today in my in what I got from my pantry, so therefore I'm going to eat, all these cookies later on. Like, there's, we are complex human beings, and our behaviors are not always rational. So,
yeah, and I think this comes back to Gary's point around, this really is a system, both from the macro point and from the individual point of being an irrational human being, despite what economists want us to think. But,
or rational. I mean, that may be under somebody's decision-making, that may be a rational decision, I should say.
That's fair. And then I just wanted to also add, Feeding America has done some research projects around this on how their interventions have been benefiting, and to what degree some of their clientele, after realizing that a large percentage of their clientele does have diabetes and obesity, and seeing how they can better address those. And this has all kind of been in concert with greater emphasis on the ability to rescue and recover more perishable food. So thinking about your proteins, your dairy, your fruit and vegetables. Any other? Oh, Tom O'Donnell.
Yeah, hi. Robots. So a couple of issues that have come up here. Thank you. Yeah, robots. A couple of issues that have come up as recently as an hour ago about trying to minimize and reduce food loss and food waste, one of which related to farm situations and the idea of sending some sort of a micro, small company or whatever with a microprocessor to farms to process surplus farm products that wouldn't be left in the field. And admittedly, that was pointed out as being very expensive, but I'm wondering if, in terms of food processing, if robotics would enable smaller microprocessors to be effective in going from farm to farm. That's one. And then the other question is, another thing that came up was food banks having to reprocess a lot of food that comes in, wonderful food that comes in quantities way too large to distribute. And it's very costly and expensive and challenging to do that. Could robots repackage?
Mm-hmm.
They were even talking about using saws to cut up frozen fruit so it wouldn't drop below temperature, somehow be involved in that. And with the answer to those questions, is that something that might sound like it might be fundable in your group?
Absolutely.
So I'll answer that question as best as I can. So first of all, those types of tasks are very difficult to do. Okay, there's a reason why the human does it. I had a colleague of mine who built one of the first apple harvesting robots. This guy from Carnegie Mellon. So he had a 300-pound robotic arm. He had 300 pounds of what's called LiDAR. It's a very expensive imaging system to pick an apple that weighs 2 or 3 ounces. Okay, so he had $500,000 worth of equipment on that. That was the first generation. Nowadays. You can buy some of the low-cost collaborative robotic arms, is what we call them. They're now going for $25,000, $30,000. Okay. And what's really nice about those is you don't need a safety cage, so they can work right next to people. Okay. So the price of the hardware is coming down, and I would expect in the next 5 to 10 years you'll see robots at the $10,000 price point, and they'll work pretty much alongside what the human can do. But the real problem is how do you get it to do everything the human does? How does it identify that fruit? How does it grade that fruit or that product? How does it know, well, pick that one, don't pick that one? All right, and then to make all those decisions. The human does it so incredibly well, but getting a robot to do that, and that's kind of the artificial intelligence side of things, is very, very difficult. So despite everything you hear in the media and hype about robotics and AI is going to take over your jobs, trust me, we're not even close to doing that. Okay, so you're all safe. So don't worry about that at all. So, but it's a great research project because it's bringing together all the things which are really, really challenging in robotics, but applying it to a process that has real value and things like this. So I would hope that would be something that FAR or another organization would be very interested in funding, because it is a very difficult, challenging project that we're not close to being able to solve today. And the same thing with the harvesting in the fields. Again, such a hard problem because of the imaging, the lighting conditions, cloudy days such as today, and all of a sudden the bright sun comes out. There's still real challenges to being able to do this. That's why, when I talk about robotics, it's always in that 5 to 10 year horizon, okay? Because it is really, really hard. But I think that it's things which are doable. I think that if we focus the right people, in collaboration with the people who have that application, I think it's very doable in the long term. It's not something that someone's going to have a solution next year for you. But I think it's a great problem. So I'm going to write a proposal. So you want to partner?
Yeah, so we are obviously looking for innovations in technological innovations, something that could be applied widely in agriculture, for example. So yes, I understand that, for example, picking specific fruits or vegetables, that would be very specialized equipment. But if we are talking about, strawberries, let's say, it would be nice, especially with the labor shortages now that we are seeing with in strawberry fields. That would be certainly one of the solutions that would benefit the society. And moreover, if we could have those robots picking fruit 24 hours a day, right? Theoretically, that's
right.
Possible. So imagine how much labor cost you would save in doing just that. So yeah, obviously, numerous benefits from doing that. So yeah, Send me that proposal.
And one of the things also to remember about all this stuff is, a lot of people get afraid that we're replacing people. You're taking people's jobs. And I mean, I'm probably preaching to the choir on this one, but I mean, I don't know a single processing plant in America that's not understaffed, where they just cannot get people to do the work. I know growers in South Georgia who last year didn't harvest anything because they had no manual labor. Okay, so this problem is getting critical. So it's not just that we're trying to put robots in there to cut cost. We're putting robots in there because we don't have people to do the jobs. And these jobs are absolutely critical. And as you start expanding out and finding these other applications, we need more technology. And we just don't have the people. And I've seen all kinds of rather staggering statistics, in 5-10 years, the percent of people that are working in the United States is dropping from like the high 70s, and by 10 years it'll be 65%. We just don't have the people to do these jobs. And the sooner we can get started on this type of robotics work I think is very important.
I think it is worthwhile also to look at technologies used, something I mentioned before, used outside of the food system, especially, for example, by military. Can some of them be adopted? DARPA has a lot of interesting technologies that possibly could be used in the food system, and they have very extensive robotics programs. So perhaps there is a place there to look for some kind of collaboration. Mm-hmm. Just an idea. I used, in the previous session, I used this example of actually an instrument that was developed originally for the military use, something that is known now as Roomba, a thing that is going around the room and basically picks dust from the floor. But originally it was developed for the military to identify mines in the field. So, simple change, obviously, and suddenly we all have it. Not looking for mice, but for dust, so.
Any other questions from the audience? Oh, thank you. You didn't come to the front, that's why it was hard to see you.
So I was just wondering about the one of the last points about people throwing food in a compost bin and that sort of allowing them to feel better about wasting food. And I wondered about, I work in composting, and I hear anecdotally that people see the waste and they start reducing the waste as they compost. And I wondered if there was any research that might back up that anecdotal evidence, or what evidence is, or disprove that anecdotal evidence. Anybody?
So I just talked to Laura from UC Berkeley this afternoon, and her work shows that when someone will pick up the food for you and compost them, then people are more likely to generate more food waste, right? Yeah, and but if when the people they compost at their home, they need to make the efforts to take the food waste to the community to compost them. Then at that point in time, they generate less food waste. So you are right. So basically, when people perceive there is a higher cost of wasting food, either by composting by themselves or other issues, and they will waste less. But if someone else is taking those costs for them, composting for them, they are more likely to waste. So that is a really interesting point.
But I don't think that any research has been done, to my knowledge, really looking at what would be the effect of some kind of communication or education campaign that goes right along with composting to help raise that awareness and get people thinking and questioning that kind of unconscious thought process that leads them in this direction. So there's a project.
One more back here.
Has there been any research done on the public ad council campaign, Stop Food Waste?
Mm-hmm.
And is there any research going on to evaluate people's perception of food waste? One of my wishes is to make food waste as embarrassing as littering, but we're pretty far from that at this point.
They have been doing research. Is there anybody that's been involved in that wants to describe it?
Do we have Dana or Elizabeth in the room? They're in the hallway. Dana Gunders.
Report to the front office.
Oh, there you are. Thank you. Dana, do you want to say do you want to speak briefly about the program evaluation that's going on with the Save the Food campaign?
God, I feel like I just got so busted. The Save the Food campaign program evaluation. There is an ongoing survey. That's the primary evaluation. They do a weekly survey, out like an omnibus survey, and there are certain questions for each of their campaigns, including Save the Food. When I say they, I'm talking about the ad council. So there are about 8 questions that are ongoing and evaluated, and it's been a while since I looked at them. Some of them are evaluating awareness, but others are actually asking about behaviors that are practiced in the home, because they are trying to evaluate, if behaviors shift over time. And their age, they have age brackets, and they're all representative, official, real surveys. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yes, and is any of that information being shared yet?
No, and I guess I'm the only person in the room who could even sort of speak to that. I think it's, I'm not sure.
That's okay.
We were going to put up kind of a 6-month thing. We get it kind of delayed. But it doesn't have to be confidential, let's put it that way. And I think there is the possibility of sharing it. It's kind of more been a bandwidth issue of trying to pull it together into a shareable thing. I'm pretty sure the NRDC owns that data, so it can do with it what they please.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me put you on the spot. Did that answer your question? Did you catch all that?
Sure. So my question is about communication of your research and data trends, and I think we have some great examples in the room of kind of really easily accessible and understandable data sources, so like the USDA recovery map that you guys recently produced, webinar on shortly, and refed the innovator database. So I'm just want to ask you guys if you have, and you, Roni, were mentioning a network also kind of system. So I'm kind of thinking about data visualization and how to easily communicate some of the research you're doing and the trends that you're seeing to kind of the general public.
And Roni, I'd actually love for you to take this. Some of your research is very easily accessible. Not that, in the sense it's easy to digest, easy to understand. It's not a lot of academic jargon. And how do you do that? And how did you get on BuzzFeed?
BuzzFeed, I honestly, they came to us, so I don't know. But in terms of our research, I would say, well, I worked before I went and got my PhD. I worked for 6 years as a health educator. So making information really clearly understandable is something that comes naturally to me, and that's a priority in terms of how I write and how I think about how I want to explain things. And I happen to work in this wonderful center, the Center for a Livable Future, that has really prioritized communicating research and making sure it doesn't sit on the shelf. So we actually have a communications team, and they help us with blogging, and they help us with developing, in some cases, products or visualizations, things like that, to help get the word out there. So I think researchers, I believe, have an obligation to engage in communications and to respond to media requests, but we also, that's not the primary thing we do. So I think it's really incumbent on academic organizations to have people that can help with that communication.
And I just add to that, at ReFed, and our designers actually in the room over there, we work with an incredible firm that helps us make those attractive, because we recognize that we can put all this fantastic data together, but the roadmap would not have been picked up as much as it did if we didn't have those beautiful visualizations like you mentioned, and if it wasn't appealing to everyone outside of this room. We care, we're interested in food waste because we care about food waste and the different motivations, but other people might say, ooh, that's a cool graph, or ooh, that moves. And that's why they want to click on it and look at it. And so, we're incredibly indebted to our communications and design teams too.
I actually have a request for
And we have found that that's, the research we've seen, that's for residential at the consumer level. However, we've seen at the commercial level and the institutional level that the opposite is kind of true, because the minute you separate it and measure it, you see it and you make a change. And I don't know if Andrew Shackman is in the room, but he demonstrates that through his Lean Path program. And that the differences in behaviors between a commercial enterprise and residential are quite different when you separate the material out. So just being cautious of not making that blanket statement that being able to have an access to a compost program makes you waste more food. That may be true for the consumer, but it's not necessarily true for the institutional restaurant grocer because their interests are different.
I think that's true, and I'm not specifically aware of that data, but I would say that it just highlights the really important point that context is everything. And within this work we've done, because there's so much work left to be done, we haven't dug into the context always that we need to.
Yeah, so basically in our experiment, it's a cafeteria settings. There are specific context, and there are diners that we provide food. So yeah, when we want to expand the conclusion from that specific experiment to a broader environment, we should be more cautious about that.
And if I'll just offer a slightly contrarian point of view, because I like to do that. To me, it's a lot like the Fitbit tracker. So I wear my Fitbit. I'm one of the weird people who wears it all the time. But if you talk to Fitbit, the average person uses it for 3 months and throws it away because they get tired of the data. Okay. Most people, if you give them data on composting, they'll be really interested in that for about a week or two, maybe a month. And then, it just drifts away. And they're going to return back to their original things. And I think this goes back to the whole thing. Whenever you put the human in the loop, all bets are off. So.
And we had one more over here from Tom.
Danny, I'm interested in the study you reported on college, where it's cafeteria food service situation, and once the students learned that composting was available, they wasted more food. Is that correct? And then if that's correct, I have a question based on that. So
basically, the experiment is like we randomly assign participants into 4 groups, and some participants receive information about food waste or not. At the same time, they receive information about composting or not. When we compare the students who only received information about the social and environmental cost of the food waste, but no composting, this group of students, they wasted the least amount of the food. For those students who have both information, that they know food waste is super bad, there are costs of that, but at the same time, they also know composting can solve the problem. Composting can reduce environment costs, and someone is going to help us compost those food waste. When they receive both information, they waste more compared to that groups of the students.
Okay. So then my question is, a little spin on that. If the students were informed about the level of food insecurity among students on their own campus, and they were informed that by wasting less food, their students in their community would benefit from that, the food insecure students, how do you think they would respond?
So in our study, we only informed them the general food insecure issues in the U.S. Yeah, that is an interesting element that we can test in the future, because when they perceive their behaviors could change their friends or the people around them, they may have more higher incentives or motivations to do the good things. Yes, that makes sense.
And can you also look at the time effects of that?
What?
The time effects. So
yes.
Is it really strong at the beginning and then drop off?
Yes.
I think it's interesting.
Yes. So currently, it's like a one-time experiment. That is, on that day, they receive the information, they make their ordering bit decisions and make their food waste decision. After the lunch, how long they will remember those things, we don't know. That's why we need better measurements methods to track their decisions in the long run, to see how those educations works at their home.
I would just supplement with that with our national consumer data that found that the number one motivation among U.S. consumers reported was just saving money. And then there were a few things related to guilt. And this idea that the food would then go to somebody who's food insecure is tricky because it may or may not, but there are a lot of ideas that it would. But we found what I think is really important is that we found that the environmental consequences were the very last reason that U.S. consumers gave in terms of their motivations. So there's some education that needs to happen.
I always just find it interesting that I read a report. It happened with me when I was a kid. My parents always raised me with the fact of you need to clean your plate. There's starving kids in India. Okay, that never worked. So we never cleaned our plates.
Well, let's do one more, Gary, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you. I think we did I'm from ampleharvest.org, and we had done a study in 2015 and 2016 of 2,500 home and community gardeners across America. And an interesting piece came out of that. As a gardener, and for those of you who garden, you invest a lot of time and energy in your food, when you're in your garden, when you're growing it. And I think you put value in the food when you've invested in the food, because we found, and we have the results, that the gardeners said that given the opportunity to donate food, more than 4 out of 5 would donate the food. And about 60% would actually grow more just for donation. The point being, if they have a personal investment in it, I think they can take their personal feelings about the food and pass that on to the needy in the community. Mm-hmm. If anybody wants the information, the study, we have it. But I think the involvement you have in the food extends to the food itself ultimately.
Well, thank you so much. Are you done? Okay. Thank you so much for all of y'all's participation and for joining us today. And I just want to commend each and every one of you up here for all of the great work that you do. And, as you guys have hopefully picked up on, this is a very, very complex issue. And, we've mentioned things around immigration, around socioeconomic equality, around equity, around environmental consequences, around climate change. And so this is a very, very big topic to be covering. And I think it's just really fantastic that each of you is working on this from a different angle, from a very unique perspective, and that you're pushing for collaboration and to get more results and data and information out there. So just please join me in congratulating them on their great work.
And thank you, Katy.
Thank you. What is this?
Chocolate.
I don't want to pick it up.
Oh.
Good job.
Oh, great. Okay.
Friends, we're going to go right into the closing plenary so that I know people are eager to network a little bit before you go home or get out of here. So we'll as soon as these...
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Do you mind if we move out so they can do the closing plenary?
Okay.
How many people do you need to be able to...
That's terrific. Yeah, I will take a look. Yeah, I will do that. Take care. Yeah, we should. Sure. Yeah.
And people who are in here, if you want to move up a little bit, because I think other people are going to come in and fill in the back. And we're going to do some wrap up in here back from all the different working groups. So stay. We'll be quick. We will not let you out late. Sorry. Hey, Amy, can you just go yell in the hallway that we're going to start the closing now? Thank you. Yeah, and just stand down in the front.
Okay, so we really have to...
Still.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. The interns are supposed to do that. So we might need to. Are you looking at something? You guys are going to run my board out, right? Okay. I see Amy coming in.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna start a wrap up because otherwise we're gonna lose people, and we don't want that to happen. So, if you're in this room and you can sit, please do.
If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times.
All right. So we don't have a lot that we want to do, but we did want to share a few next steps. We wanted to take another moment to thank everyone, and also we wanted to hear from the working groups because I think most people were able today to participate, and you saw that there was a lot of energy, a lot of forward momentum on these topics. So I think we'll do that first. We'll just have some reporting out from each of those groups, and then we'll do a couple of closing thoughts just from us as organizers.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask, we have our folks in the back, we'll run the mics around, so I'm going to ask the working groups to report out. I'm wondering, Jackie, are you in here, and can you do date labels first? All right. So Jackie, so let's do this, just 3 quick takeaways. I know so much happened in the rooms. If you can keep it short, we will also be sharing out information and notes, but this is a good way in case you missed a working group to hear what they're going to do and see if you want to join and be involved going forward. All right, thanks, Jack.
Great. Yeah, so I'll just summarize. There were kind of 4 subgroups within the date labeling conversation, so I'll highlight those and then perhaps 2 of the action items that came out of it. But we split up today to focus on policy, both at a national and state level, measurement, both of progress and impact, consumer education, and then the science behind setting dates. So all the conversation has been around the verbiage. Let's have some conversation around the actual science of the dates. All were really engaging. We actually had the group vote on which action items to share today because we had a lot of action items coming out of it. But so the 2 that I would highlight, one is on policy. There is draft language for, we've heard about the federal legislation, so providing feedback and input on that and helping to shape to make sure that it takes into account the needs of all the stakeholders involved. And the second one is around measurement. We are going to publish this year in 2018 a methodology for measuring impact on food waste and GHG emissions associated with standardized date labeling. It's already started, and the working group has agreed to kind of provide feedback and push that forward. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you to the Date Label Working Group. All right, next is research. Katie. Is she in the room? Is that not who's reporting back from research? Okay, I'll come back to that. All right, how about packaging? Angel. None of our reporters are in the room.
Come back to
okay, come back to her. Organic waste bans, Lorenzo. Oh, good. So organic waste management and policy. Can you just give your 3 big takeaways from your working group?
All right, hello.
You walked in right at the right moment.
Apparently. Okay, so yeah, let me get my head in the right space there. Great. So we first of all spent some time sort of defining what is the purpose of the group and what was the organics portion. And so we decided to focus, this is on food scraps, and it's not an either or of donation and prevention or composting or other food recycling technologies. It's both, it's and that sort of a baseline was we were not going to have any recommendations that would disincentivize donation or prevention, but the focus was going to be on promoting more organics recycling activities, and that in general we need policies and incentives, and we need to address the barriers that will make more activity happen in the marketplace. So in other words, we need economic drivers. This needs to make financial sense for all of the stakeholders, and that in general we liked bans, but that there need to be the supporting policies in place that make those bans possible, and that a ban is not enough, that you need all those other components and a lot of stakeholders involved to make it happen, and information and education and assistance to help those that are going to need to comply to do that activity.
Great, thank you so much. All right, thank you to the Organic Waste Working Group. I think I saw Katie come in. Okay, Katie, can you report back from the research group?
So one of the big observations that we kind of aligned on was really this need for collaboration, better coordination. And if any of y'all were in here, you heard Roni mention that she's actually started research projects before and then found out that other researchers were working on quite literally the same thing. So one of the big needs is just for better coordination and communication, including more inclusive collaboration. So bringing in other groups that are typically left out of these conversations, including laborers, including marginalized populations, including farmers and other groups as well, and making sure that we're really having a comprehensive opportunity to get research out that's addressing all of their needs. And then one of the really big needs from a research perspective that we're interested in continuing to discuss moving forward is a shared methodology and harmonized measurement. I know we have quite a few tools out there and different methodologies that have been proposed and are being implemented across different pieces of the sector, but making sure that we're speaking a common language in our research and in our data, from both the academic standpoint to the implementation standpoint, whether that's with innovators or food businesses or policymakers, or municipalities and everyone in between. But looking at that measurement piece is a really big opportunity that could lift up a lot of the other research that's going on, from evaluating different solutions and cost effectiveness and feasibility. So measurement and getting a common methodology and language.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you to the research measurement group. All right, farm level surplus, Dylan.
Hello, my name's Dylan Frazier. I'm with the Boston Area Gleaners, and I was a co-facilitator with the Building Infrastructure for Farm Level Surplus. This is an existing working group from 2016. And as we reconvened this working group, we wanted to include new members and then also cultivate and build up the new energy that was there in the room this year. One of the major themes that underlined the past 2 days was focusing on farm viability and supporting farms and their ability to make donations and find new markets. There were 5 key areas that we identified as threads that we want to focus on going forward and continue to work on in the next 6 to 12 months. And those include compensation for farm donations, developing secondary markets, developing physical infrastructure, and exploring farm-level markets beyond fruits and vegetables to include proteins. That would also include donations for proteins. And then continued research as to the how and why there are surplus crops and why there's food loss on farms.
We should collaborate on that.
Yeah, we should.
Hey, good. Okay, thank you so much to the farm level group and to Dylan for reporting out. Let's do healthy donations group, which was Marv, and then we have one more, which is packaging. We'll get to that last.
Thanks. I'm Marv Zauderer, founder of extrafood.org in Northern California. So our group was focused on increasing healthy food donations. And co-leading with me was Doug Rao of Daily Table, which with Extra Food also has a nutrition policy, so check it out. Marla Feldman from Mazone, she has a very interesting new report on the nutrition quality of food in the food banking system. You can find that at mazone.org, M-A-Z-O-N. And of course, our chief whipcracker and ace consultant, Dana Gunders, danagunders.com. So our group focused on 3 things. One, tax incentives and or disincentives for donating healthy food. A, whether or not that's even going to be an effective tool to help with the problem. And B, if so, how to get those in place at the federal, state, local level. Second, a best practices toolkit for all stakeholders involved, so recipient agencies and food donors and food recovery organizations and government and so on. So for example, one of the many pieces of that, a customizable poster template to be posted at food donor organizations with pie chart on most requested food and donation instructions and a way to ask questions and get them answered. Third piece, communication hubs that would both be a place where input for the toolkit could be gathered and also a place to actually publish and distribute the toolkit. So we have volunteers who are convening follow-up conference calls on all 3 of those projects. So if you join us, we'll give you a chocolate kale cookie, I guess, or something.
Thank you so much. Okay, fantastic. Thank you to the Healthy Donations Working Group. All right, and then lastly was the packaging group, and I think it's Christina that's reporting. Is that correct? Or whoever is reporting for packaging. Okay, good. Thanks for getting the mic over there to her.
Hi, I'm Christina Balsito. Sorry, I missed the call earlier. So reporting back from the packaging group. So, just to begin, we spent a lot of time addressing some of the tensions and trade-offs that come up with regard to packaging in this conversation. So, mitigating food waste can call for more packaging. Also, as you think about portion sizing and when you think about the goal of increasing the shelf life, can also call for extra packaging, which just comes into tension with some of the sustainability goals that we've talked about also at this conference. So we kind of addressed some of those elephants in the rooms as a group, and then broke down into groups to focus on policy, education, specifically consumer education, and lastly, ownership. So who owns making these calls going forward. So with regard to policy, just I'll name some highlights from each of these groups. So when it comes to policy, we talked about, first of all, just the value that comes with having a strategy to begin with, and government's role of helping the right people to convene, motivating and guiding those actors going forward. We talked about tax credits, of course, and some of the challenges that come around with using the stick method over the carrot method. So we talked more so about tax credits. When it comes to consumer education, spend some time talking about the messaging that is effective for consumers, and really creating a messaging structure that is around how to get the most value from what you're buying. One of the ideas that came out of it was creating some sort of an identifier, a symbol, to help educate consumers about the packaging. So for example, there might be one symbol that can indicate to consumers if it helps to extend the shelf life, or on kind of the other side of the coin, if you're cooking something tonight, you don't need that extra packaging, so maybe there's another symbol that kind of indicates what the purpose of the packaging is. And then lastly, with regard to ownership, we talked a similar theme, it seems, across conversations. We talked about the importance of pre-competitive alignment here, and also creating potentially some market-based incentives. So having a holistic cost-benefit analysis. So for example, if it is the manufacturer that is putting in the extra investment to creating a packaging that they would actually see the benefit from that by the time it gets to the end consumer.
Awesome. Thank you so much to the packaging group and to all of the working groups for really good conversations. We actually accomplished a lot in not that much time. Just on that, we will be able to share a little bit of high-level points of what the groups will work on going forward. I know maybe even after today, the groups will have a better sense, so that if there's a chance that people want to join a different one, there's a way to do that. So let me turn it to Chris for a few more words.
Well, Emily, I was just wondering if we're launching a line of denim jackets at this conference. We should dress together more often. We have just wanted to, first of all, say, following up on this conference, we'd love to get feedback from you, both on things that you loved about the conference that we can continue as we think about this in the future, areas of opportunity that you see. And one of the things I'd love to have is actually outcomes of the conference, so anecdotes from you about maybe new connections you made or things that you're excited about doing as a result of the conference. We often will get together talking about how many people we got, but I actually think what's been really special about this is the connections made, some of the partnerships and working groups formed. So we'd love to actually use the survey as an opportunity to gather all of that information and really value your input and feedback. Second would say, let's continue the conversation, both in all of our interactions, but also with the two newest members of Further with Food, let's use that common platform as a way to post and share resources. Go there, I know there are over 300 resources on the website today. That's precisely the place to share all the great knowledge that's being generated in between times that we get to see each other in person. And finally, just want to, and I know Emily will reiterate this, but just thank the staff who ran this, and in particular, Chris Hunt from my team, and I know, Emily, you'll thank your team as well, and the sponsors, and finally, you, the attendees. I've been really inspired by these 2 days and just think we got an amazing group together, and I've just really appreciated the energy and expertise that this group has brought, and the spirit of collaboration and just fun. I was at the networking session yesterday and just observing how excited people were to be spending time together. So thank you for that energy that you've brought.
I agree. They were either really happy to have drinks or to hang out with each other. I agree. Let me, before I say my final thanks, just two logistical things. First is there's a lot of leftover swag and the Save the Food bags right outside the door. If you already took one and want to take another, if you are a secret admirer of someone and you want to give them a scale or a compost bin, now's the time to do that. We don't really have anywhere to put them, so please take them with you. And then there's a bus at 4:45, just as a reminder. I know people know that, so there's only one bus back to the hotel because we know people are going different places. So I want to echo the thanks really to the entire team that worked on this. And again, we named everyone in the beginning, but just from the Food Law and Policy Clinic in particular, Katie Sanson and Annika Nielsen, and all of the other staff and interns and volunteers were amazing, but those two really haven't probably slept in a month, and along with Chris Hunt. Let's appreciate them.
Yeah. Chris, can you stand up? Annika, Katie.
So, and I know they've done an amazing job. And I also, again, want to echo the point of thanks to all of you. You have been fantastic and really kept us energized throughout the few days. So stay in touch, enjoy your safe trips home, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.